many pictures of Daddy, but that's pretty typical of him once he would get home. See, he'd have a paperback book in his pocket and a Roy Tan cigar in his mouth and always reading something. He was an extremely brilliant man, until the drinking takes you down, doesn't it, folks? And y'all know that. It takes a brilliant, brilliant soul and can really take him down. In the courtroom, Daddy, remember, he was raised in Brooklyn and New York. He insisted that his Negro clients be addressed with the dignity of a title, Mr. or Mrs. The judges were usual calling them first name only, along the demeaning custom. Daddy was a smart man with a quick wit and ready smile. He had what someone once called an eidetic memory. He could quote large passages from the many law books that lined his office. When Daddy won a case, all seemed well for a while. It was fees or famine. It seemed Daddy's payment for legal services would sometimes come in barter. Once someone left a basket of freshly caught fish on the front porch. This led to a night of guts and gore in the kitchen sink as Daddy showed us how to prepare the fish for the frying pan. Scales were flying all over the kitchen counters and floors, and the bloody water filled the sink. I don't think Daddy cleaned it up. My sister Eileen remembers another time when Daddy's legal fee was paid with enough cucumbers to fill the bathtub. Where we washed them off before slicing them, putting them up in jars of vinegar, and we ate those sour cucumbers for a long time. Daddy lost his job when Henry Loeb, a wealthy Brown University graduate and former naval officer, was elected again in 1968. Loeb, like many in Memphis, upheld the genteel form of structural racism practiced by wealthy whites. Loeb was an avowed segregationist whose obdurate ways would be especially harmful during the sanitation workers' strike. Isn't it amazing how things don't change now? You had to hold a sign that said, "I am a man." Now folks have to hold a sign that says, "Black Lives Matter." Tell me how that's different. We have to hold a sign to declare our dignity as a human being. The work of collecting garbage was left to Negro men. Most were paid, now I should have capitalized that and put it in, most were paid less than $2 an hour. Sanitation workers Robert Walker and Echo Cole were ground up like garbage on a cold and rainy February in 1968. Those were orange trucks that came by our house all the time until the strike happened.
Did you mean that literally?
Yes, absolutely. They were ground up like garbage. It was a rainy day, and they were standing on either side of the truck, because they would have to put the garbage in. The compressor switch shorted, and the man in the driver's seat didn't realize it, and he sucked one in, and the other reached to get him and was sucked in as well. That's what sparked a labor movement that had been simmering for a long time in Memphis, but Memphis was not happy with labor unions because they were afraid of race mixing among laborers. That would upset the social order in our fair city. Okay, let's see. I bet I can find something on that. Around this time, I was 19 around this time. Here we go. During this time, I was a secretary at Anderson Clayton Cotton Company. I often walked along Main Street on my lunch hour, where striking workers and their allies paced single file up and down the sidewalk in front of department stores and other businesses. Their sandwich board placards read, "I am a man," and "Dignity and decency for our sanitation workers." Back at my desk, I overheard the racial slurs and the angry and fearful words of many of my employers and coworkers who were threatened by the changing times and hardened in their racist attitudes. On my bus rides to and from work, winding through the so-called colored neighborhoods, I saw the garbage piled outside houses, dumped in vacant lots, or spilled in the middle of the street. The unusually cold winter minimized the stench and reduced the threat of river rats feasting on the refuse. But the strike was taking a toll on the city. And there was the murder at the Lorraine Hotel. The young man here, Larry Payne, 16-year-old, accused of looting, chased down by the police, cowering in a corner back in the housing project where his family was. Things are not changing very much, folks. Things are not changing very much. It was a summary execution. You know, we didn't have due process. And his family, his sister, approached him, went to touch her brother lying in the street. And the police stuck a shotgun in her belly and said, "Back off, Ann," to her. She recently spoke about that. But I put this in with Larry Payne because we have to call the names and we have to know that things are not changing very quickly. And we people who have privilege and relative power have a job to do. Dr. King was slain, of course, you all know that. Riots were breaking out in our city, this is Beale Street. The National Guard was there. You can't see very clearly, but those are tanks where they were riding. Next time I saw tanks like that patrolling city streets, it was in Belfast, Northern Ireland. Reminded me very much of Memphis in the 50s. I arrived home at dusk the night Dr. King was killed and heard the news. I may have caught the last available bus from downtown that night. Mama worked on South Main at the Fred P. Gaddis store just blocks from the Lorraine Hotel where the shooter was said to have taken aim. She too would have been making her way home by bus that night, passing the hotel where James Earl Ray had waited, rifle in hand. The alleged getaway car, a white Mustang, was said to be speeding east on Jackson Avenue, just blocks from our home. Our neighbors, Tommy and Jean, had a shortwave radio. My brother Michael remembers they listened to the police scanners reporting the pursuit of a white Mustang. Mama got off the bus at Jackson in Decatur. She later told Eileen that she'd seen a white car with men inside who were acting very suspicious. She reported it to the police, but never heard anything further. My brother Tommy, back from Vietnam then, talked about the out-of-town military men he had seen having drinks at a VFW or some such veterans club up the street just days before the assassination. So, how long will it take? How many more must die before we can really have a free and true and peaceful society? Coretta Scott King said that in front of the main building in Memphis. I went home that day when they were they were having a memorial march. I was dismissed early from work. I walked home because they shut off all the buses. I couldn't understand my employers. They were saying, "Go home and get your rifles, the ends are marching." You know, they were frightened. Well, no buses were running. I walked home. I don't know what they were afraid of. They lived 10 miles out with the white flag. So my sister Eileen and I came back. Walked back the 2 miles. It was cloudy and cool that afternoon, and we walked quickly down North Parkway to downtown. We arrived as the speakers were addressing mourners from the large scaffold platform set up in front of the new City Hall. Among the notable mourners was Senator Ted Kennedy, Dr. Benjamin Spock, Mrs. Rosa Parks. Soon after the speakers concluded, the assembly linked arms to sing "We Shall Overcome," and began the silent procession back down Main Street toward Beale. Eileen and I were swept up in the silent, breathing mass, 8 abreast, arms length. We walked down Main Street with a measured cadence between gauntlets of National Guard troops, bayonets affixed to rifles who lined the entire route. Some soldiers perched in the turrets of their M48 tanks. I could go on, but read the book, there's more to it. Now we know about Vietnam, don't we? You know those handsome young brothers of mine. Mama couldn't do a damn thing to keep them out of the Marine Corps. I mean, they won Junior Cook of the Year. They could cook some mean food. They were handsome, weren't they? All my girlfriends. Daniel, Joseph, and Thomas Patrick. We were all named after saints whose lives we were going to emulate. So, I find it nearly impossible even now to read about the Vietnam War. But for years I've stood with Veterans for Peace on public vigils, feeling the spirit of my war-wounded brothers on either side of me as I go into battle as a warrior for peace. As the American war on Vietnam continued, many young Memphis men were among the wounded and dead, too many for anyone to keep up with. And too many more whose deaths came later, as our brothers did, from the Agent Orange poison that lingered and killed them. Still killing folks. Ask some of these homeless people on the street. Agent Orange still killing. Those names were not etched on the Vietnam War Memorial in Washington, D.C., nor on the memorial wall later erected in Memphis. A lot of grief in writing sometimes books. You know, brings up stuff that's unhealed still. A lot of hurt, a lot of anger. They were good men. They didn't deserve that. Now there's my daughter. I did get married. I did marry right out of, to get myself out of Memphis. I didn't pick very wisely. Let's see, I got a minute or two, maybe, okay. Y'all bear with me, I'm really close. Throughout my marriage, I longed to return to college. I found my opportunity at El Centro in Dallas, earning tuition part-time. My relationship was in steady decline. Jessica's father offered little support of my efforts to finish, and I carried most of the burden of after-hours child care and housework. My consciousness had been raised by the women's liberation movement. But pursuing women's liberation principles and putting them into practice with an uncooperative and unfaithful husband was quite another story. Divorce was an ugly word, and the reality even more so. 1970s. I had no preparation for this change in status. Despite all my efforts to save the marriage, I knew I would find no solace or support from the Catholic Church, and little sympathy from my "you make your bed, you lie in it" family, whose warnings I had ignored. I was a divorcee, and if I were to die then, in the custom of the day, that would be the first descriptor after my name in any obituary. She's a lovely girl, that daughter of mine. She's married, got 2 beautiful children, lives way far away in Texas. She said, "Nashville's not big enough for both of us, Mama." So I got a little feisty. In Memphis, the white train carrying nuclear warheads was coming through. So that's me looking up at the police there. Now this is one issue that caused both my mom and my daughter a hassle when I did this, because I didn't prepare them well. Mama found it on the 5 o'clock news when I was being hauled away by the SWAT team, and Jessica had to endure from the sidelines. We really thought they would pull us off the track before that train carrying nuclear warheads came through our city, but they waited. Finally it stopped. We also, my daughter and I, went and founded a shelter for homeless women and children in Florida, and we worked and volunteered in some in Memphis. Some things never change, do they? We got to carry the same damn signs, don't we? So then I got a little feisty and wanted to live off the grid, and we built a catamaran, and that story's in here, going down the Mississippi. It's a great river to go down. We lived in a teepee for a while. Up in Hawkins County, Tennessee. Our journey began at dawn on a wing and a prayer, borne by the vagrant winds and the river's steady flow. I could tell you more, it's in here. It's a great story. It was a great trip, too. Then I had to to figure out what was going on in Belfast. So my daughter's in college. She's out at, I think she was at Warren Wilson then, maybe Antioch, I forget. She tried her hand at both. So I went to Belfast. Wow. They said I had a fool's pardon because I was crossing back and forth through the peace walls, so-called peace walls, followed, often followed. I couldn't tell how they could tell each other apart. It was easier in Memphis. You know, you knew you're supposed to hate these people, not these people. But in Belfast, it was a little different. It was what names they were called. Some said it was how their eyes swam. Mostly, it was their loyalty to England and their loyalty to that and their fear of the Catholic overtaking the entire island. But there were lots of stuff going on in Belfast. That's a good story, too. I met some interesting people. And then I spent a little time in the federal prison at Alderson. I was in one of those big barracks, and that was my cubicle. It looks just like that. I was on the top floor. If you want to read about that, Conscience and Consequence, I'll tell you about that. And next steps, I'd say we make books, not war. And I've got many more stories to tell, and I know all of you do too. You got stories. You got stories, and you know, when we tell our stories, we write the history of people's history. We make sure it's heard. And we need to do that. It's important. Oh, here, things don't change, do they? Did y'all hear about all the citations being issued recently? Well, heck, I got 3 for Occupy. They dropped the charges on 2 and caught me, nabbed me on 1. That's just down the street.
That's great.
Yeah. Yeah. Aren't that dangerous? May you have the commitment to harvest your life, to heal what has hurt you, to allow it to come closer to you and become one with you. From the great Irish writer John O'Donoghue, A Blessing for Old Age. Thank you.